Hello everyone. My name is Satyajit Sahoo, and I am a front-end developer at Callstack. And I'm also the lead maintainer of React Navigation. So I'm very excited today to talk about React Navigation 7. Hopefully you're using React Navigation in your apps, and hopefully you like all of the updates we have. So 4 years ago, on this stage, we announced React Navigation 5. And it had a completely new API. It had a new dynamic API, and we rewrote it from the ground up. And we received a lot of positive feedback. This update is not that drastic. Like you don't have to rewrite your apps. Hopefully that's a good news. Yeah, hopefully you will like all of the changes we're making. So before we take a look at React Navigation 7, let's talk a bit about the previous versions of React Navigation, especially the versions before React Navigation 5. So previous versions of React Navigation, such as React Navigation 4, 3, 2, even 1, all of them had a static API. So you have to define all of your navigation structure up front, and it's in the objects, it's all static. You cannot change the navigation tree dynamically, and that's how it was. With React Navigation 5, it all changed. But both approaches have their own advantages and disadvantages. So let's take a look at the difference between these two. So there are a couple of disadvantages of static API. First of all, you cannot have dynamic navigators. So your navigation tree is static. If you say, OK, I have 3 screens, then you have 3 screens. You cannot add more screens later. You cannot remove screens, right? And then also, you cannot declaratively change the tree like the first point, but that means you cannot do things like authorization flow with the static API, like you can do with React Router and all of the other web-based routers. You cannot lazily load a navigator because all of the navigation is static. They have to be defined up front. So you cannot just load a navigator lazily, otherwise it won't integrate properly with the navigation system. And then all of these disadvantages are there, but there is one advantage that you can statically analyze the whole tree. And that means you can do a lot of tooling around it. For example, TypeScript, deep linking, all of these things can be done if we can analyze the tree statically. Right now there is this, everybody is excited about Expo Router, right? And Expo Router can do a lot of things automatically, like deep linking, static types, because it has a file system-based structure. That means Expo Router can statically get the whole navigation tree, and which allows it to do a lot of cool things that cannot be achieved with the dynamic API. So why cannot we do that? Why cannot we get static type information from the dynamic API? Because all of our components, all of our navigation structure, all of our screens, navigators, they are inside components. And you can render components anywhere based on any logic. So there is no way to know the navigation structure without rendering all of the components. And you cannot render literally every component in your app, right? It's just not possible. So, and also you can only render during the runtime, but you want autocomplete in your editor, and before you even run the app, right, while you're writing the code. And that's not possible with a dynamic API. So we had a lot of complaints, and a lot of people were unhappy because writing the TypeScript types was difficult with React Navigation. Basically, we had to have a dynamic navigation structure, all of our components with the navigation, navigators, and the screens. and then you have to duplicate this exact structure for deep linking, for defining the types. So it's a lot of duplication. You have to keep them in sync. Like if your types are different than a navigation tree, then of course that's not good because you're not getting the correct types. You're if you have type checking, that's not gonna catch errors. But like I said, it's not possible. I spent a lot of time trying to make the TypeScript experience simpler, but that's all you can do with the dynamic API. So to avoid this issue, we are reintroducing the static API to React Navigation. Before I proceed, I just want to make it clear, we're not changing the API. This is an additional API which you can use if you want. It's not replacing the dynamic API. It is built on top of the dynamic API. So yeah, basically it's not a replacement. Do not rewrite your apps. But you can try this. And let me know how it is. OK, so let's take a look. So first, let's take a look at the existing dynamic API. First, we have some function like create stack navigator, create bottom tab navigator, the function to create the navigator. Then you render the navigator, and you have a screen. And the screen takes a bunch of things, like the name of the screen, the component to render, any options you want to render. I mean, I don't have options here, but yeah, And when we translate it to the static API, is very similar. You still have this function. The change is now you have an object, like you had in React Navigation 4, and you have the name of the screen as the key, and then you can pass a component. You can pass other things here, like the options, like deep linking config, for example. So you can pass everything here. So after we write the navigator, then we call a function called create static navigation, and it gives us a component. And then you can render this component. So this component is very similar to navigation container. I mean, it's essentially the same thing. So you can do all of the things that you could do with navigation container, like you can have an on-state change method here that you can use to track state changes. You can persist the navigation state. So you can do all of those things here. And for TypeScript types, this is how it works. You have your navigator, the root navigator. Then you have a global namespace, and inside the namespace, you have root param list. It's the same API as React Navigation 5. The only change, sorry, React Navigation 6. The only change is now you have this static param list helper. And it takes the type of root navigator, like it could be root stack or tabs or whatever you have. And then it will automatically import the types of this navigator, all of the nested navigators and everything. So this is all of the code you need to have auto-completion for your navigation. I think which is pretty cool. You don't have to write anything manually. Yeah, I hope it will be helpful. So next thing, authentication. So like I said previously, one of the advantages of dynamic API that you can conditionally render things. And that's really cool, because in React Navigation 4, you had this thing called switch navigator, right? And with switch navigator, you had to manually navigate after login to actually change your navigation tree. And that's not a very good experience, because every place you have some kind of logic for logging in or logging out, you will have to do this. Or maybe let's say you have some code which checks for the cookie, and then if the cookie is expired, it clears it, right? You also need to change your navigation tree. So those kind of things, it had to be manual. And with Switch Navigator, it was not really a good experience. And with the dynamic API, we had conditional rendering and conditional rendering of the screens. So you could easily switch your screens based on the authentication state. So this was a problem. This is a problem with the new static API, right? But we have a solution. So we added a new option called if. It's only available for the static API. And it takes a hook, a React hook, and that React hook can return a Boolean. And if it returns true, then we have the screen in the navigator. And if it returns false, then we don't have it. So this is kind of achieving the same conditional workflow as the dynamic API. I know it's not as intuitive, but it's better than nothing. So, yeah. Thank you. So before I wrap up the static API, there is one last thing. You know, those two are very different, right? Same for dynamic and static API. And we have one question, like, will they work together? Like, say if you have an app, and you decided, OK, I'm going to use the static API for this because it looks cool. It's a new thing, you know? It's cool to use new things. So you write your whole app in static API. Now you have a requirement that needs the dynamic API. Maybe you need to fetch a list of tabs from the backend and render it, right? And then what? Do you have to rewrite the whole app? No, right? Like, that's stupid. So yeah, so we want you to be able to use both static API and dynamic API together. And we made sure that it is possible. And if you have any problems with it, of course, open an issue. But we are focusing on it, making it work. So for example, say you have the dynamic API and you want to try out static API. You can do something like this. You can create a component. You can create the linking config from the tree you have in static config. And then you can just render it inside the dynamic navigation. I mean, you know, this is like just a slide, so it doesn't have much information. And we are writing the documentation, so you'll be able to see like full details with more examples on how to do that in the documentation. OK, so that wraps up the static API. So there are a couple of more features we're planning, or like we already have in React Navigation 7. So let's take a look at that. So first of all, who remembers this package? This is a very old package. If you have worked with React Native for like long time, you probably know this package. This package implemented the drawer layout on iOS and Android. And it was last updated actually 6 years ago. So recently, we took over this package, and we extracted our drawer implementation from React Navigation and published it as a standalone package. So if you need a drawer, like say you have a user list on the side, and you just want to render a drawer without like connecting it to the navigator, now we can use this. Like, you do not have to like mess around with nested navigators and stuff just to be able to use a drawer. So yeah, this is already on NPM. You can already use it in your apps, so feel free to use it. And the next thing. So who knows Canny? OK, very few people, so more people need to know that. So Canny is a website where you can request for features, and you can vote on them. For React Navigation, we use Canny to like track what people want, right? And it's very helpful. Like, I don't think GitHub issue is very easy to like see what features people actually want. But with Canny, we can actually look at top voted things and like whatever people want, right? So if you want any feature, go here, vote it, or create it. Anyway, so the top voted feature request on Canny that we had is custom transition animations for Tab Navigator. And with React Navigation 7, you will finally have custom animations. I hope the video will play. Does it? Yeah, it does. OK. So So this is one example of a custom animation. I mean, this is just an example. You can have any kind of animation you want. You can have a fade animation. If you want like a whole thing to move, you can do that. So we have an API to build custom animations like we have for Stack Navigator. But yeah, you can finally have animations in Tab Navigator as well. Yay! And one of the other things I have seen, I mean, this was not a upvoted feature request on Canny, but I have seen a lot of people like ask something like this. Basically, like maybe you have an app, and you want to render a drawer on the side on bigger screens, but a tab bar on small screens. I think it's a pretty common case, right? If you have a big screen, why waste all of the horizontal space and move the tab bar to the right, left or right? That makes sense, right? So previously, the way you had to do it, you had to conditionally render a drawer navigator and a tab navigator. I mean, it provided the experience you wanted, but it's not really a good experience because conditionally rendering like this will destroy all of the state. So if you resize your browser and it changes from tab to drawer, all of the history of the tab navigator is gone. And like any local component state, say user had a form and they filled form, now they just want to make it a bit bigger to see properly. And now all of the form state is gone, which is terrible. So with a new version of bottom tab navigator, you'll have a way to render the tabs on the side. I mean, of course, this is the default layout of the tab. You have icon at the top and label at the bottom, but we'll also have icon on the left, label on the right, or you can like provide a custom component to render a custom, custom sidebar. But yeah, we'll have this. And then a few more things. We'll have better RTL support, a new method called pop2. It will allow you to go back to a screen by its name and also pass params. And we'll have like new updates to our component based on the new metal design. And there are a lot more. I just don't want to like list all of them because I don't want to make any promises that I cannot keep. But yeah, you can go to reactnavigation.org/next. And you can try the new version of React Navigation 7. It is currently in alpha. The documentation is also not complete, but right now we really need people to test it, provide feedback, because the static API is completely new. And of course, there will be bugs. And yeah, it will be awesome if you can test it and provide any feedback. Like if you think there can be something improved or there are bugs, let me know. Yeah, I'm sure like all of you are tired. This is the last talk today. And hope you are excited for the party. And I will see you there. Thank you.